Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back. I'm using this little part of the tutorial that I just made. This cool, interesting looking emitter with the Newton field applied to it. And I'm going to use this to expand a little bit on the properties for particles. The particles, whenever you want to change the properties again, you change them the particle shape. And I'm going to keep these guys as sprites, because sprites have a scale. So if I take their scale down, I can make them a little bit smaller. There we go. And I'm just going to press play, and that's what we're getting right there off the bat. Most of the properties here are the same for all of them. Maybe a scale, right here scale. In some others is line width, and in some others is the radius. So just keep that in mind. But let's see. If I wanted to add a color, I can add a color to particles as a whole, sort of like as a society, or I can add particles on each individual. I can add color to each individual particle as an individual. It's like so you can think of them as a big group of people or as a little individual. And same with the opacity. You can do it on a whole bunch, on all of them at the same time, or on each one individually. If you do them to the whole, you add them as an object. If you do it to the individual, you add it as a per particle. The short for per particle is pp. Okay. So per object is pretty simple. If I add attribute per object, then it will change the value to all of them. And right now they're black because the color red, the color green, and the color blue is 0. If I make this 1, then they're all blue. Or if I make green 1, then they're all green. Or if I make red 1, then they're all red. And if I take those, then they're white. Straightforward, hopefully, right? As you know, you can assign shaders to this, but you can also do something else. You can add a color to the particles. You can add colors to the particle. You can do it on a per particle value. But in order for you to do that, they need to have a lifespan. So let's start by figuring out how to change the lifespan. You can change the lifespan by looking for the lifespan attribute, and you'll see it says live forever. So if I make it constant, they're going to live for 1. 1 means 1 second. If I make it random range, then I can make them live for 1 second with a random of 0.5. So some are going to live a second, some will live half a second, and some will live a second and a half. So what's going to happen is, bloop, they start dying. See? Bloop. And if I make it 3 seconds, then some particles are going to be more and some are going to be less until they die out. Alrighty, so got these particles, they're dying out. I'm going to make this lifespan a little bit longer, 8 with a random of 4. So they last 8 seconds and then they die out. Some last a little bit longer than that. And then they die with the sound effect and everything. Alrighty, so now that they have a range. Oh, there's one more, but that's via scripting, lifespan pp, and I'm not doing scripting here, so. Alright, color. As you already know, we added to an object, and you can add the shader, which is what we did, but let's do it on a per particle basis. When I add that, then there's this per particle array attribute, and all these guys, you can add scripts to all of them. Some of them you can add ramps to. Most of them are via scripting. So lifespan pp, RGB pp, which is the one that we just added, is an attribute that you can add a ramp to. So I'm just going to go ahead and create ramp. And if you go in the options, I suggest you take a look at what happens if you change it to all these guys. But right now I'm just going to keep it as the particle's age. Why? Because that means that whenever particles are born, just right click edit ramp, when they're born, they're going to be red. And when they die, they're going to be blue. And from their birth to their death, they're going to go moving through this ramp. So see how they start changing color? Alright. Now, that ramp, if you need to edit the ramp, you can always right click under RGBPP, go to the array mapper and hit edit ramp. Or you can go to the hypershade and under textures, you'll see your ramp right there. I'll call this ramp color ramp. And because you tend to have a lot of ramps whenever you're doing particles, the best thing to do is to name your ramps so you don't get confused as to what ramp's doing what. And you can add ramps for the opacity. So I can also do an opacity per particle, and there is the opacity. So if I go ahead and create another ramp, and if you look at the ramp value, it actually goes from white to black. So now, as they die, they are becoming more and more and more and more transparent until they dissolve. So you don't see them actually just pop out. They actually are becoming more transparent as they are dying. It's a pretty handy thing to be doing here. Let me just change this a little bit. So now they're a little bit more solid, and they're just going to start becoming transparent as they die. There we go. See? So you don't actually see them pop out. They just go hiding. And you can keep doing things like that. And there, like I said, there's a lot of attributes. There's also like radius or the scale. So what I can even do is I can tell this particle. I'm actually going to do this with another particle. Just going to go with the let's say the directional. Here's no. Let's do it with the. Let's do it with the volume cone. Okay, so there's the volume cone, and it's generating particles, as you already know. So I'm just going to change these settings for this cone so that it emits particles along the axis, like so. And of course, if you change the shape of volume, you're changing the shape of how they're being generated. Alright, so select those particles, and again, color, add per particle, and opacity, add per particle. Now this time, since I already have those ramps made, I'm actually going to go RGBPP, right click, create ramp, and map to color ramp. There you go. And then lifespan PP. Let's just actually, sorry, let's just go ahead and change this ramp and call it opacity ramp. And opacity PP, create ramp, option box, map to opacity ramp. See, so they're already created, so it's making my life a little bit easier. So if I press play, there they are, they're dying out. Because I changed those values, it automatically gave me the lifespan, which it made constant. So I'm just going to make it a random range of 6 and 3, say 5 and 3. So they start dying out. As they get older, they die. Go ahead and change up that opacity ramp so that they start dying around here. There we go. Okay, so let's change this particle type from point to. Should I keep it simple or should I make it complicated? Let's make it a little bit more complicated. I hope you can transfer the information here. So I'm going to do sprites, current render type, and like I said, there's a scale, right? So if I made them smaller in the scale, then they are smaller there. Well, if I wanted to add more per particle attributes than what I see here, I can go to General, look for particle, and this is the list of attributes that you can add per particle. Right? So, because these are sprites, and the value that I want to change over time is called scale X and scale Y, sprite scale X. Let me look for sprite scale X, PP, there it is. See? So I can just add them, close them, and now I got a sprite scale X and Y per particle, to which I can create a ramp, and I can map the other one to the same ramp I just created. So if you go ahead and edit the ramp, you can actually see what's happening here. When they're born, they have a radius of 1, and when they die, they start becoming smaller and smaller till they get to 0. You can do the opposite. So 1 and 0. Black means 0, white means 1, because white has a value of 1 and black has a value of 0. So now if I rewind, press play, they're small, except for that one that just did that there. But as they get older, they get bigger. And you can see we're not seeing the pop because they're becoming more transparent as they die. So it's nice and smooth. Alrighty. So that pretty much takes care of that. And just keep in mind that you can always change the values manually. So if on the scale I wanted them to end with a value of 2, for example, and start with a value of maybe like 0.2, then they start small and they start getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And you can also even change the type of interpolation so that they look different. Smooth, bump, you can see how that changes. Spike. So it's also pretty handy to do that there. And that pretty much takes care of that when it comes to particles. So are some of the main attributes. One more that I'm going to talk about, which is I guess the most important one, is whenever I add a field, such as let's say turbulence. Now these guys have a turbulence field assigned to them. So you can see how they're being deformed by the turbulence, right? Let's increase the magnitude to 20 and the attenuation to 0, so it's really pronounced, or 2.1. It's really, really pronounced. Well, if I were to change a value on the particles called conserve, the conserve is, you can think of it as almost like a dampening. It's like a dampening of the kinetic energy. They're not conserving the motion. That means that they are influenced more by a new motion. So that means they're going to stop going up and start following whatever the field is telling it to. So, and it's a really sensitive value. So like if I do 0.998, it's a very small value, but it's got a very big difference there. See how they're like really following that that field. And the rest is just playing with the field from that point on. So if I were to change the frequency and made it bigger, and actually you make it bigger by making the frequency smaller. Now they're really influenced by the frequency of this turbulence. Frequency 0.3. And then you can make some interesting looking particles there. See, they look pretty. And lastly, which is the rendering part, I will stop right here and I'm going to render this interesting looking particle. Alright, so I'll see you in a bit.